wanted to go over the Sweeten company problem, or a number of aspects of it. It has two departments, and the first series of questions, they want you to use departmental rates. And then the second series of questions, they want you to use a plant-wide rate. So let's see what that would look like. They also want you to get how much overhead was applied in the various departments to the various jobs, and also what is the unit cost and the sales price per unit. So all kinds of different things that we could ask from this data set. So let's get the predetermined overhead rate. Let's start with molding. The formula is the same whether you're doing a departmental rate or a plant-wide rate, but you would only use the overhead in that department to get that department's rate. So in molding, what is their estimated, expected, or budgeted overhead? Well, it's the $1.40 times the machine hours that they had plus their fixed cost, fixed overhead. So their total overhead is the variable plus the fixed. All right, what about in fabrication? So theirs is $2.20 for each hour, so that's the number of hours. And then their fixed is $25,800. And then their various hours, $4,300 in molding and $25.80 in fabrication. So we would take that total overhead in molding and divide it by molding hours. And we would take the total overhead in fabrication and divide it by fabrication hours. So now we have a rate for each department. So now let's apply those rates. So we get the rate at the beginning of the year. We're not going to use that estimated data again. Once we have the rate, we're done with that, and we're sitting and waiting for an actual machine hour to happen. And as soon as the actual activity happens, you start assigning it at $5.40 per hour in molding and $12.20 per hour in fabrication, all year long. You see an hour in there, it gets that rate. See an hour over here, gets the other rate. So for job P, how many hours, actual hours, happened in molding? 2970. That's going to get the molding rate. So molding will assign $16,038 of overhead to job P. Now what about fabrication? Well, we had some hours in fabrication, and fabrication has a different rate. So they're going to get charged for each of those hours in fabrication, the fabrication department rate. And so the total overhead for job P will be both departments. So if I want the unit product cost for job P, I'm going to take my materials and my labor. I'm going to add this total overhead that was applied in both departments and get the total cost of my job. And they tell us there are 20 units in job P, so I would divide that total cost, and that gives me my cost per unit. And let's say that their policy was to have a 75% markup. I just made that up, just to show you how it would be. So then you would take that times the 0.75, and you would add that to the cost to get the selling price for each unit. All right, why don't you pause this and you do job Q and then restart it and check your work. All right, so let's see if you match me. We had 1380 hours in molding, and molding's rate is $5.40. And then, so that would be 7,452 assigned to job Q from molding. And now what about fabrication? So they use 1,500 hours in fabrication, and that rate is the $12.20. And so they would have been assigned 18,300 from the fabrication department. So the total for that job overhead would be the 25,752. And then you would go about getting the unit cost, the same process. Their materials, their labor for that job, and you would add this overhead for the job to get the total cost of the job, divide however many units there were. Looks like it was 30. And then if you had a markup and you wanted to get the sales price, that's how you would do it. Plant-wide rate. If you were just using the plant-wide rate, you get the total overhead. So that would be both departments and all the machine hours. And you would get a plant-wide rate. All right. And so that plant-wide rate would go to any hour, machine hour, whether it was in molding or fabrication. So what would job P look like then? Well, we wouldn't be using the overhead from each of the departments. We would just get $7.95 for every hour that job P used, regardless of department. So up here we can see they use 4,000 hours. So they would use the $7.95 times the 4,000. And you can see it changes the cost per unit, changes the sales price, and so forth. So your answers when you're using a plant-wide rate for the two jobs and the unit product costs are going to be different. They're going to be different. Okay, let me know if you have any questions.